Hey guys, kia ora, whakalofa lahi atu, and no mai hoki mai. Welcome back to this week's podcast episode. I am so excited because I have a beautiful guest on my podcast this week. I have Yaz joining me. Thank you so much for being here, Queen.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, and I'm so excited to get into this chat. I was actually on Yaz's podcast, and then we had such an epic conversation that I was like, I need to get you on mine because I know this conversation is going to help so many. The work that you do, what you speak about, I think it's going to shatter a lot of beliefs that people have around eating, around weight loss. And it's just going to be a freaking epic conversation. So I'm excited to bring you on. I know it's going to help so many people. So thank you so much for being here. And I would love for you to introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for having me. So, my name's Yasmin. I am also known as Yaz, and I'm essentially an emotional eating and spiritual weight loss coach. So, my journey with emotional eating started as a child, really, but it wasn't
Mm,
so prevalent where it was causing me quote unquote discomfort, right? So, I've always had a relationship with addiction in some form, whether that was food, alcohol, smoking. Thankfully, nothing more hard than that because I do have
mm,
a personality, but I use alcohol, even shopping, to numb, to dissociate, to distract myself. And so I started in the world of personal development very young. So, my first book I remember purchasing was Excavating Your Authentic Self at the age of 18. So I've always been fascinated with personal development, always interested in growth and development. And like anyone, I ended up in the quote unquote, following the quote unquote societal path, despite knowing better, because I didn't know what the other options were. And obviously, I needed to go down this path in order to become who I am today. But I ended up doing all the things in terms of creating a corporate career, getting married, having a son, buying the house, two matching cars. And I got to a point where I felt so disconnected and unfulfilled in my life. Never really
mm,
lost my relationship with myself, but I knew there was something more. And so as I exited an 18-year relationship, towards the end of that relationship, I gained a lot of weight. So weight, I should say, wasn't really an issue for me, but I
mm.
escaped through alcohol, cigarettes, shopping, and things prior to food becoming very prevalent. So after quitting smoking, it's actually next week, next Friday is my birthday, and I will be celebrating 20 years sober. And,
Amazing.
and I would have quit smoking for 20 years on that day too, because they both went hand in hand for me. And so as I exited that relationship, I ended up being 20 kilos heavier than I was at the end of my pregnancy, right? So whilst weight was never an issue for me, I always danced sort of 5 kilos here and there. And I got to a place where I would look at myself in the mirror and think, who is that person? Not just because of how I looked aesthetically, but I felt so disconnected from myself, my truth, and my power. So
Mm,
I went about this journey of like trying to work out how to shift weight without falling into the trap of, diet culture and things like that, because I always knew it wasn't for
mm,
me. So I never tried dieting. I didn't do any pills or no sort of, quick gimmicks. But
mm,
I bought into, like, I had the language around body positivity, self acceptance, intuitive eating, but I was using that in the form of self love to still let my shadow play out, right? Because I turned to
mm,
shadow work about 4 or 5 years ago unknowingly, because I came to a point where I was doing all this work around healing and coming to terms with certain traumas in my life, both in childhood and into my teenage years, and I shed about 10 kilos naturally, but then I plateaued. So I knew how to move my body, I knew what to eat, I knew what I needed to do, but I'd find myself in this cycle where I'd go months, sometimes even a year of being quote unquote good, and then I'd fall
mm,
into the trap, and I was like, there's something deeper here. And I always had this feeling, like this sensation in my body where I actually felt safer with more weight,
mm,
right? And I was like, when in my younger years, it came in at various points in my life, and I would not look at it because I didn't have the courage at that point to look at it. And then I had that sensation again, and I was like, this is more, like there's something deeper at play here. It's
mm.
time to look. like really work with the body instead of the mind. So I started doing the shadow work, I started doing embodiment work and energetics, and then I was able to start releasing more, but
Mm,
also was able to really hold the standards I wanted to hold in the way of how I wanted to eat, how I wanted to move my body, because the energetic and the shadow work is one thing, but you still need to take the action and be who you need to be in order to embody that lifestyle that you just.
mhm.
So all in all, I'm about 20 kilos down now. And each stage of the journey, I have worked with myself to stabilize and normalize that. So I never wanted quick results. I wanted sustainable.
Mhm.
And so I've been doing this deep work now for at least 4 years, and I've been emotional eating free for 2.
Wow. I love this. I love this so much. Like, congratulations on all, like, being sober, quitting smoking, the emotional eating as well. Like, huge. These are huge, huge things. And there's so much to unpack. As you were talking, I was like, we need to talk about this. We need to
Yeah,
talk
there
about
is.
that. We need to talk about so many things. So one thing that I love that you speak about is that you didn't get on this diet culture. You didn't
Mm.
get on this hamster wheel that I talk a lot about with my women. And a lot of times when people see bigger people, they think, oh, they need to lose weight. And the way to do that is to punish yourself, is to starve yourself, is to jump on all these diets. So when you had reached out to me initially to jump on your podcast, I really had to look through your content to be like, hey, is this aligned?
Yeah.
Because I saw weight loss and I was like, and if I'm honest, there's not many people doing weight loss, or that I've found anyway. You might notice that there's a lot of people in your niche doing it this way, but I find there's not as many people doing it in the way of getting to emotional eating, because it is a drug. Eating food is a drug, right? It's an addiction. And then spiritual weight loss as well. So it's
Mm.
like shedding, not so much like the weight, like your physical weight, but it's shedding, these beliefs that have held you back for so long, these traumas. Like, it's trauma, it's energy stored in the body. So everything that you talk about, I'm just like, yes. So I would love for you to speak about, you talked about shadow work. Actually, I'm not even sure my audience is familiar with what shadow work is, because I don't think I even say shadow work. So I would love you to talk about shadow work. Actually, talk about shadow work for a little
Sure.
bit there. And
Sure.
yeah.
So the way I teach shadow work, so shadow work
Mm,
essentially is around looking into the shadows, so looking at the parts of us that we've repressed, denied, suppressed, or are fearful of, right? So I'm
mm,
sure some of you may have heard the word triggers. So a trigger is when you are being triggered either by someone or something, which is bringing up something in you. So, and it's either something that you don't want or do desire. So it's not
mm,
every trigger is something that you want, is actually what you also don't want. And sometimes that one is more suppressed because you're fearful to look at it, because your chances are you're being that too.
mm,
So it's looking at that, but and I take it a layer deeper in that you're also then taking accountability. So it's understanding the trigger, understanding what the suppressed trauma is, or that part of you that you might have suppressed or denied. So that could end up in being, an aspect of your creative nature. You've never really identified as someone who's creative, because we are everything. And to
mm,
become a fully integrated human, you need to express. And creativity doesn't necessarily need to look at like art. It could be cooking for you. It could be
mm.
dancing. It could be journaling, or it could be sexuality. So some people suppress their sexuality. So that's a shadow. So it's
Yeah.
looking at the parts of you that you've suppressed, denied, or are fearful of. And sometimes one of the most common shadows is that our fear of becoming our parents, for example.
Mm,
Yeah. And then taking accountability for the role that you're playing in it today. So we can understand that we all have, trauma, and trauma can be like small t or capital T trauma in terms of, people's journeys, starting in
mm,
childhood, teenage years, 20s, 30s, and beyond. But you get to a point where you're still playing out the same patterns because there's a secondary gain. So it's going into the shadows, understanding what your patterns are, why you're doing what you're doing, where that stems from, whether it's childhood or certain trauma, but then saying, okay, well, I'm an adult now. This is not happening in my life anymore. How am I continuing to play out this cycle with myself, with food, with alcohol, with diet and exercise? And how am I benefiting from it?
mm,
Because the shadow is always keeping you safe, and it's going to stay in a familiar state, because it will always prioritize safety and protection
mm.
over progression.
Yeah. Yes, I love all of that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so many women have tried every diet of under the sun, right? They go straight weight loss. They're like, cool, jump on a diet, restrict, punish myself in the gym, all these things. So, what does emotional and spiritual weight loss look like, and how is it different from what we've been taught?
It's looking at what's underneath what you're doing, right? So why you do what you do and how you're benefiting it. So from a shadow work lens, it's not just understanding the pattern, it's understanding what's called the secondary gain. So
Mm,
it might be, turning to the chocolate and chips at night because you're numbing, you need that dopamine hit, you need a bit of a sugar hit. But
mm,
what's underneath that, why are you still doing that? And it could be some form of safety. So it could be emotional protection, it could be preventing blocking yourself from intimacy with yourself and with others. It could
mm,
be creating a physical shield in the way of protection, whether that's in the form of, again, it could be emotional, so emotional abuse that you may experience in current day or the past. It could
mm.
be a boundary, like a body violation. It could be many things, but ultimately, it's understanding what's driving the pattern and how you are still benefiting from it. And it may not always make sense. Like it's not always so
Mhm.
obvious where you're like, oh, I'm doing this, so it must be this. It could be something completely left field. And when you look at personal development, you hear a lot about working with the subconscious and the unconscious. The shadow lies beneath that, like it's deeper than that.
Mhm.
So you can be the most self-aware human on the planet, but you're probably still not fully aware as to what the secondary gain is.
Yes. I love this so much. And I relate so much. I shared with you last time we spoke, like something that came up for me around emotional eating was that if I was to have, actually, I figured out one of my triggers is if I had a day where I didn't feel seen and heard,
Mhm.
whether that be at work, whether that be a conversation I have with friends, whether that be, I don't know, there's so many ways you cannot be seen and heard, right? But if I didn't feel seen and heard, that would then trigger me to go to food, because this also stems from my childhood as well with my parents. I didn't feel seen and heard in childhood. My parents weren't really around. I felt abandoned as a kid. And the thing that was there for me was food. So I would go to food and it would soothe me and make me feel good because I was like, oh, like this is my comfort. It's that comfort eating, right? So then I'd feel good and I'd be like, okay, cool. It would help me regulate my emotions. It would help me feel
Important.
better. Yeah, right. And that was this pattern my whole life. And I was like, well, why do I have such an inkling to go for food when I felt upset, when I didn't feel seen and heard, when I had a bad day, all these things? And it was always like, okay, I'm picking up the food every time. And I would jump in bed, have my snacks, watch a movie, I'd feel better. And it wasn't until I looked, I guess, yeah. And what's the word where you go back and
Mhm.
unravel everything. And I was like, gosh, like this is deep trauma to my childhood that like I'm still doing these patterns today. And, then it would change to other things as well. But this was the one thing that it would always come down to. So I love that you mentioned that, it lies in the trauma, it lies in the shadows. It's that shadow work.
And then uncovering what the secondary gain. So yeah, you're doing it because of the trauma and the childhood
Mm,
and the pattern, but then how are you
yeah,
benefiting from it from a shadow work lens?
right. Okay. Well, I feel like that's going to uncover so many things. Maybe I need to like check into that. Like, what is the secondary gain? Huh. I love that you mentioned that as well because yeah, there is secondary gains with a lot of things. Um, so what role do unhealed emotions or trauma play in our relationships with food and our bodies?
Mm. So it comes back to emotional regulation, right? So I grew up as someone who was quite emotionally intelligent, but I lacked regulation because I would use
Mm,
alcohol or shopping or food to numb, to soothe, to distract. So I got to a point where that weight was essentially a lifetime of suppressed and
mm,
repressed emotions that I wasn't allowing myself to feel because I always wanted to be in the feel good state because as humans, we're wired to move away from pain and seek pleasure.
Mm.
survive, right? So that's food became my survival. So the role unplayed emotions and trauma and processed trauma plays up is that it's still stuck in the body. So you may have intellectualized it. You might have done therapy, counseling, hypnotherapy, kinesiology. Like there is a whole heap of amazing modalities, but it
Mm.
intellectualizes it. So there's two aspects. So like counseling and psychotherapy and that sort of things intellectualizes it, but you're still holding it into the body in the body. So you may have processed it, but you haven't really felt it and released.
Yeah.
So that's where things like tapping and breath work and just a static dance and those sort of things can be beautiful.
Mm.
The other side, you can go down the rabbit hole, quote unquote, trying to heal yourself by uncovering, what happened when you were 8 and what that means now. And I don't believe there's a need for that. It serves a purpose to some extent, but you get to a point
Mm.
where like you understand what your core wounds are, and now
Mhm.
you take ownership, step into your power and make different choices, because you can spend years doing kinesiology sessions or hypnotherapy or whatever it is, uncovering what Art and Bet might have said to you at 8 that created this
Yeah.
in your body. Like it comes to a point where in your personal development journey that no longer is serving you. Like it becomes unnecessary. So
Mhm.
it's like using your discernment to say, what do I need to do? How do I need to learn to regulate? What am I not allowing myself to feel? Because some people also find themselves in this place where they start to regulate, they start to feel their feelings, but they only feel what they're comfortable feeling
Mm.
and still repressing what needs to be felt. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the part of feeling is feeling it, releasing it without trying to make sense of it or make it mean anything, like just letting it go.
Mm.
And again, using discernment around is this something I need to explore, or is this something I just need to release?
Yes, I love that. I love the releasing piece as well because I totally agree with that. There's so much you can do in realizing what's happening and going back to childhood and playing. And actually, something I used to do in the past is I would play
Mm-hmm.
that cycle over and over again. Yep, that's my childhood, and that's what I do, and that's what I. But the thing was, I wasn't moving on. I was still allowing that to be my story. I wasn't identifying it as the past. Like, oh no, that's behind me. I'm here now. It was still a part of my story, and I had to actually release that and stop telling myself these same stories over and over again. And releasing for me looks like I love tapping, I love breath work. So getting that energy out of you because it is stored energy. There's a lot of stored energy within you that you need to release. And also dancing. I love the dance as well. So I
Yeah.
love that you mentioned that.
Like crying and
Crying.
building a healthy relationship with anger, because what's underneath
Mm,
anger is generally fear or passion,
yeah,
not allowing ourselves to repress, to express. So
yeah,
that repress in the body, particularly
mm,
like a lot of women have a difficult relationship with anger because of childhood.
yes,
Underneath that, instead of suppressing that, that needs to be felt through, cathartic screaming, punching a pillow, whatever you need to do, but learning
mm,
to do that in small amounts to build your capacity to hold it and express it.
yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned all of that. So, so good. Can you share a powerful client transformation where, shifting either spiritually or the emotional patterns change their relationship with food and their body?
Mm-hmm. So there's one client who came to me and she'd spent years doing dieting, therapy, mindset work, and she was in the health and wellness industry. So she also felt a lot of shame around how she showed up online, like
Mm,
in terms of visibility. So it was holding her back and sort of being in her business, and it was also preventing her from being intimate with a partner. And one of their biggest desires was to start a family at that
mm,
time. So within a session, like because I spent years doing this work, I can pinpoint what's going on within like 15 minutes, right, on our session. So within our first session, I could see exactly what pattern she was playing out, which again stems
mm,
back from her origin story with food around her childhood. So she lived in a very contrasting environment in that her parents had separated. Her mum's side of the family was exceptionally wealthy and had an abundance of everything, including food. she lived with her dad, who was very poor. So they lived on in the US on food stamps, and
Mm,
lots of lack in terms of food, and they'd go days without food at times. So when she would go visit her mum, and that didn't happen very frequently, but when it did, she would gorge, yeah, because like,
mm,
this is just, couldn't control herself, didn't know how to regulate, and totally normal. She's a child, she didn't know, she wasn't taught that. But as she became an adult, she got to a place where she had built a certain level of wealth and abundance. And her ego was like playing out this power play role of like, I will never feel deprived again. I'm never going to live in scarcity. So she'd go through feast and famine, just so she was recreating this cycle
mm,
through the dieting culture um, story, right? So she'd go on
mm,
these sort of dieting restriction periods where she'd pull back and try to live in scarcity, and then she'd gorge and she'd binge and whatnot. So after identifying that, it came to a point where she needed to really understand the secondary gain, which we did. And then within a very, very short period of time, she was able to sort of take her power back, because what that does, like through shadow work, is it puts you in a place of power. Like it puts you in an empowered place where you can now
mm,
choose differently. So you understand the pattern, you understand the secondary gain. Now you need to exercise choice and personal power
mm.
to choose differently. So instead of trying to rewire your brain, you do that through actually being who you want to be.
Yes.
Yeah. And choice, it all comes down to choice. So
Mm,
she drastically changed her relationship with food. She constantly felt in this abundant state, but her mindset around it shifted because she used spiritual practices like praying over her food, gratitude, things like that to create that regulation before she would eat. Her
mm,
relationship with her partner changed drastically because she was no longer conscious of how she looked in the bedroom, and she started showing up widely differently in her business
mm.
as well.
I love this so much. Oh, I love your work. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, amazing. That literally you change people's lives. That is life-changing work. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think a lot of women will feel seen in that story. I actually felt seen in that story as well because I grew up in government housing on food stamps and a similar thing. Like when food came in, it was like, okay, cool, like we've got to eat everything because I don't know when we're going to get this kind of food next.
Mm.
Yeah, survival. And it was always like the yummy food, like the sweets, the chips, the you just wanted to eat all of that first and then like whatever to everything else. So I had this thought throughout my whole life that if I had a packet of biscuits, I need to eat it all. Like I would just eat it all. And I didn't realize till unpacking as well, realizing that, oh, I'm still playing out this little kid in me that thinks that if I don't eat these biscuits, someone else is gonna eat it or I'm never gonna see it again. And I had to remind myself, Leash, at any time and moment, you can go down to the store and you can buy yourself some biscuits or you can buy yourself some chips. Or when you put those biscuits in the cupboard, they're not going to go. They'll still be there tomorrow. It's okay. So I think a lot of women will feel really seen in that. And on that, like, what are some common emotional patterns or limiting beliefs or situations that play out that you see happen a lot with women who struggle with their weight?
Mhm. So my work doesn't really look at limiting beliefs and that sort of thing. So it's always identifying the shadow. So it's always looking into the shadow to understand what the pattern is and how that's playing. And I also work with the philosophy of how you show up in one area is how you're showing up in all. But it might not be
Mm,
as prevalent, right? So you might have like food is the real problem, but you're probably sabotaging with some shopping. You're probably overspending in some facets.
right.
It's all intertwined. So the most common thing is that the shadow is running the show, and most people are not aware. So they're highly self-aware what the pattern is. They're highly self-aware of what they do. They might intellectualize why they do what they do. They understand their wounds in the childhood, but they're not
Mm,
understanding what the sort of secondary gain is, which is
yeah.
why the pattern will still show up. As I mentioned earlier, when I was sharing my story, I could go months, even a year, and then something would trigger and I fall back
Mm,
into that pattern because the secondary gain was needed at that time. Because the shadow will always prioritize safety over
mm,
progress.
right. Boom. I feel like that's gonna change so many people's lives right there. I love that. Thank you. For the women who are listening, who feel stuck, who feel like they've tried everything, who are on their way of just like giving up, they're like done with it, what would you say to them?
You need to, like a lot of people talk about the why, and the
Mm,
why needs to be bigger and deeper than just wanting to lose weight and look good, right? It needs to be bigger than just the aesthetics. You need to really connect with your values, your energetic values, and what, from a food point of view, what your food values and philosophy is. Because if you don't understand that, you're going to be constantly driven by the external world telling you this is the latest gimmick, this is the latest trend, this is the latest superfood. So finding your sort of why as to why you want to do it. And when I sort of really got to that point where I was like, enough is enough,
mm,
to age well, I wanted to feel strong, energetic, and vibrant. I was sick of sabotaging my energy with the food that would like take me out energetically. I'd feel
mm,
bloated, I'd feel lethargic. So for me, my why was aging well and being able to, like, I asked myself, is the life I'm living something I would happily gift my son?
mm,
I'm not doing it just for him. I'm doing it for me, which will benefit him in the long run. But for me, it was aging well, wanting to eat the foods that I actually valued eating.
mm,
So, like, understanding what my food philosophy is. And for me, it's like largely ancestral. It could be vegan for you, it could be paleo, whatever. There's no right or wrong. We're all
mm,
bio individual people, right? So what works for you may not work for others. So if you're feeling stuck, you really need to connect with why you want what you want, more
mm,
than aesthetics, more than just a number on the scale. Because when you heal your relationship with food, you're healing your relationship to self, and that's the spiritual part. That's the spiritual journey, coming
yeah.
home to your truth, your power, and your body.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Coming home to self. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I know it's going to shift so many things for so many women. It's already shifted some things for me as well. I'm like, oh, okay, secondary gain. And I love that you talked about like people are so self-aware because I feel like I am very self-aware. But it's the secondary gain piece. And when you said that, I was like, oh, that's something I've actually looked at in the past and being like, too hard basket, which you also mentioned. It's like there's this point where you feel to a certain capacity, but then when it feels too hard, you're like, nope, that's good. So it's like having that safety within yourself. And if you can't find that safety within yourself, this is why Yaz is here. This is why I'm here. This is why coaches are here. You can go to those spaces. They can hold this safe space for you, allow you to peel back, and then help you build that safe space within yourself as well. So you actually don't need coaches anymore. You can do this on your own. Um, so I love that so much. I would love for you to plug yourself, tell people where they can find you. I know so many women will be like, who is this woman? How do we get into her space? What's going on for you? Programs, all the things. Tell us all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite places to be is Instagram. So that's the best place to connect with me. In terms of spaces and programs, so private coaching is available. It's something that doesn't come up very often. I do only work with a small handful of women at a time. And I've got my Unfuckable program starting again in June. So round two will be available. And that's really around all the work we've talked about today in a group space,
Yeah.
intimate container that runs for 6 months.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for blessing the podcast. It was a pleasure, Queen.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being here.